Good evening, and lovely to see so many of you in the room and those who are online. Welcome too. I can see you all behave like my students. Nobody's on the first row, but those who are very brave, but that's because they couldn't find anywhere else to sit, I guess. I hope that doesn't mean you're not participating in tonight's event. So it is I'm Revd Van de Noort, I'm the Vice-Chancellor, and I'll just be introducing and closing the event. It isn't about me, it is about the annual chaplaincy conversation we're having here with the interesting topic of artificial intelligence, and as my colleagues will know, you don't really want my views on that. But we have had the annual chaplaincy conversation for some time now. The real purpose is to have thought-provoking topics that have moral, religious, and spiritual significance. Now, over recent years, we've had some really wonderful speakers. And we talked about forgiveness and its limits, and the links between mental health and spirituality. But tonight's topic is about artificial intelligence, or AI, and its impact on human personhood, creativity, and the common good. Now, I think we've all seen much of the discussions in the news. I don't know, hands raised who have used ChatGPT or another? Oh, we got some specialists here. I should raise my hand as well, but so a lot of specialists in the room already. But I think there are many aspects of using artificial intelligence that we haven't yet talked about or thought about. And is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? Or is it both, as long as it's used, well, in the right or the wrong hands? So I'm going to introduce you to the people who will have the discussion tonight. First of all, our own chaplain, Anglican Chaplain, Mark, who will chair and interview 3 guests we have selected for you tonight, who are the real stars. So I have the right Revd Dr Stephen Croft, Bishop of Oxford, a founding board member for the Centre of Data Ethics and Innovation, and he has been exploring the question of regulation of artificial intelligence in the House of Lords. Our second guest, although he plays at home, is Professor Etienne Roesch. Etienne is a researcher in machine learning, neuroscience and cyber psychology. He has been looking at the impact on everyday life of artificial intelligence and how prepared we are. Welcome, Etienne. And finally, I want to introduce Charles Radclyffe. He's the former head of AI at Fidelity. He is now the CEO of EthicsGrade. He advises the pension industry on the ethics of using AI and governance risks. Welcome, Stephen. And Mark, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert. Can you all hear us? Can you hear me at least? Yep, that's lovely. Delighted to be here. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I am certainly, I must confess, slightly baffled by AI. It comes out of the blue, it troubles me, it intrigues me. That might be where you are at too. I hope that this event will be a space where we can unpack some of the ideas, but by no means all of them. I do hope that we will have substantial time for questions afterwards, so do think, what would you like to ask of this panel about AI? We really like to use this as a space for some general education to explore some ideas. We will open up questions to those who are online as well. So if you're joining us online, very good welcome. Welcome this evening. Please use the chat facility there. Just to give you a sense of structure for how I've tried to run this evening, we can do some introductions first of all. How did we get here? Why are we talking about AI? We'll spend about 10 minutes about that. Then I'd like to shift to look at the question of AI and creativity and the possibility of the impact on work and the social dimension of AI and its impact. Again, about 10 minutes or so. Then we're going to shift the conversation to AI and information, questions about truth, algorithms, and the effect upon the social economy of AI potentially. And then we'll finish with the existential and spiritual question at the end. So what does it mean to be a human in this age of AI? So I hope that's what we're going to. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on this little journey. Let's go. Etienne, what on earth is AI? For those of us who are completely baffled, could you give us a little introduction?
I'll give a quick. So the field of AI is pretty old. It started in the 50s already, and there has been many different kinds of AI going around. The aim is to produce a computing device that allows. There's a bit of an echo. The aim is to produce a computing device that allows us to make better decisions, that can take in information and wage it in interesting and clever ways. As I said, there are different kinds of AIs that have been produced over the years. One of which has sort of ramped up really quickly, especially recently. Neural networks. These are just small mathematical devices that are structured just like a neural network in the brain that will share information in order to produce a particular output. And the aim is to has been to when I give you this input, can you predict what the output is going to be? To give you an example, in the 90s, the post office was using neural networks, or has been using neural networks ever since, to recognize handwritten digits on postcodes, for example, to help and speed up the routing of letters. Nowadays, these neural networks have improved greatly, and the main thing that has evolved is our ability to converse with these AI, with these neural networks, and the way that the AI now is able to take in some written conversation, some just conversation in day-to-day language, and then understand that and turn that into fruitful outputs. And the interesting thing is that from this ability to predict the words came up a new way of creating and mimicking logic and reasoning. And so that's sort of the latest thing with AI.
Is there a step change with this description of generative AI?
That's right. So now the AI is used to create and generate new content on the basis of different.
So we've moved on from post office recognition software to something way beyond.
Yes.
Charles, so coming from a sort of business context, we've got the technical development. Businesses, I think, probably embrace this, and what are the drivers for why that has happened?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Firstly, thank you everyone for being here today. As Robert said at the beginning, I think this is a really important conversation to be had in a public setting, and I'm delighted that so many people have taken the time on a cold January's evening to join us in this conversation. I think for many years personally, I felt like I've been having this conversation with myself and not many other people in the tech industry wanting to participate. My career has been built on finding commercial applications for technology. And of course, when, I would say that 7 or 8 years ago, when AI started to enter the common parlance, it was the thing which business leaders, very quickly wanted to figure out where could we use this. I used to run a data analytics company. We now would call that AI, but back then we didn't. And when we sold the business, I joined my biggest customer, which was a German bank, Deutsche Bank. And I ran technology for their labs, basically figuring out what tech that's coming out of academia and coming out of the labs of big tech companies could we use in the bank, and what might we use it for. And one of the things I was involved with was looking at automation and AI and how it might transform the bank. And the story I'd like to share with you is when, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a paper published, I forget who it was, Boston Consulting Group or MIT or one of those people, and it said that 30% of jobs would be impacted by AI over a 30-year time frame. Not 30% of jobs would be eradicated, just 30% of jobs would be impacted. I remember reading that paper, looking at the methodology and thinking about how they were making that assessment across the whole of the economy. And I remember talking to my mum about this. My mum was a hairdresser. And I said to my mum, I said, Mum, you'll be really pleased to know that hairdressing is not likely to be replaced by robots anytime soon. And she said, oh, why is that? So I said, because it's quite dexterous. This is me kind of telling my mum, you know, how to do her job. I said, it requires a high level of dexterity, and that's quite difficult for robots and machines, and therefore you're not included in this list. And she looked at me and she said, Charles, you know nothing about hairdressing. And hairdressing has got absolutely nothing to do with the dexterity of cutting hair. It's really all about therapy. People come to their hairdresser to talk to their hairdresser, to offload, to have that kind of human touch, that human conversation. And I went back to the bank with this idea that actually we were looking at the impact of automation on the workplace in totally the wrong way. Rather than looking at the jobs that we were doing in a bank, which frankly is, you know, quite often looking at a screen and typing something into another screen. What we should look at instead were the jobs in the bank where human touch was a large component of this. And so, yeah, that was the paper I put together. You know, we looked at the types of jobs in a bank where human touch is an essential component, and I would break that down into jobs which require a high degree of creativity, jobs where accountability is really important, jobs where there's a high degree of relationship management involved, and also strategic decision making. When a job has those four components, it really is important that it's a human doing it. And everything else, kind of fair game. And so I put this into the paper thinking about the long-term technology strategy of the bank and saying that this is how we should approach things. We should really ring fence and guard those things which have high human touch components. Unfortunately, by the time that went to my boss and his boss and her boss and so on, it got to the CEO. And the CEO was quoted in the press, and you can all look this up on Google. I think it was November 2017 or thereabouts. And the CEO of the Times, now left, John Cryan, said, today we have people behaving like robots, tomorrow we'll just have the robots. And I thought it was quite an unfortunate quote, because it really missed the essence of the paper that we had written. But to paraphrase all of that, you know, in a commercial setting, you know, that is actually what's being looked at. We're looking at the work that's being done, the cost of that work, and whether that work can be approximated not as necessarily as well as a human can do it, but good enough as a human in many cases. And the sad truth is, in my industry, in finance, most of the work is looking at a screen and typing something into another screen, and a huge amount of that work is available for AI, like generative AI systems, to take on.
Okay, thank you. As we enter into thinking about what the ramifications of this might be and how we might respond to it, can we just start right at the beginning and ask what sorts of traditional answers have we had socially? How useful will they be as we think about how we respond? So I'd like to ask you about the wisdom question, Stephen.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Really good to be here, and I'd echo what's been said about how fantastic it is to have this conversation at this time. I think one of the challenges of the pace of development of this technology over the last 20 years in particular, which is driven by accelerating processing speeds and the availability of large data sets, has been that the reflection on the implications for our humanity and for our society have not kept pace with the development of the technology. So I entered this field as a non-specialist about 7 years ago, because I was I'm of an age where my adult children continually feed me interesting things to read. My eldest son is a computer games entrepreneur, and he has fed me things to read on technology. And one of the first books he fed me, I just was brought up short by a paragraph which I believe to be deeply true, that the human race, because of the development of technology and AI, will spend the next generation reflecting deeply on what it means to be human, because every development in technology reflects back on our own reflection on ourselves. And I was stunned reading that paragraph, because I thought, here I am representing a church and a tradition which has been reflecting on what it means to be human and to live well in society for thousands and thousands of years. And somehow we need to be part of this conversation. So I've entered that field and have been part of various committees and projects in Parliament and outside it. And what I've discovered again and again is that the technology is developing in advance of both regulation and systemic reflection on its impact and its effects. So the government set up a few years ago a Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which unfortunately was quite short-lived. But we explored through that centre the use of AI technology in predictive policing, with all the risks of bias and lack of governance that involved. We explored the use of technology in the probation service and in social services to look at decisions, very sensitive decisions, being made about when children should and should not be taken into care. And it's been very sobering to discover the extensive use of algorithms without always corresponding governance or human participation in decision making. And I think the whole of our society really needs to wake up to the degree to which this is happening, which is absolutely taking place across a range of the deployment of narrow artificial intelligence, and has been accelerated, as we'll see, by the generative AI that we've seen recently. So one of the very interesting conversations I had, which has left me with an ongoing dilemma, was around the use of AI in sentencing in American courts, and people are being convicted of crimes. How long should they spend in prison? When should they be released? And I objected most strongly to the idea that those decisions should be taken only by machines. And one of my colleagues in the committee at the time challenged me very powerfully by saying, you do realize, don't you, that in all the studies that have been done, the algorithm does a better job. Now, I think that's questionable. And in most studies that have been done across medicine and the social sciences, the human-machine partnership is the better one. But there's something very chilling about such a deeply important, humane decision being removed from human oversight. And that's where the logic of the technology might take us without correctives.
So one of the issues there is clearly about power and where power lies, and to what it is accountable.
It's about power and where power lies, and where humanity lies, and what is it about particular decision making and particular dilemmas which calls forth our common humanity, and where that humanity needs to be exercised with compassion and kindness and generosity of judgment, which cannot be replicated in technology.
So that's interesting. So it's not just we need regulation, we also need somehow within that to put the question of what does it mean to be human? Where's the humanity?
Absolutely, right at the centre.
Which is not something that law tends to do.
No, and not something that regulation easily does. But that's why it's vital to maintain and generate a public discourse about these things, which is somehow keeping pace and informed about the deployment of technology.
Yeah. We'll go a little bit deeper into some of those things, particularly around work and the question of humanity. Just before we go into the next level, can I ask you, what sort of benefits can you each, maybe just one or two, do you foresee coming out of AI in the next 5 years? Something you think actually it's going to be really good. Before we get dark about this, what's going to be good? Charles?
Well, I think because it's so far-reaching and it has such a big impact on the way that we work and the way that we live our lives, it's going to really force us to have this conversation. So I think, you know, that's the biggest benefit. I think is a lot of what's wrong with the way that we live are clearly wrong, because we live in a time when, you know, we have some you know, big climate issues to address, massive social issues which should have been addressed a long time ago. It's going to force us to deal with these things. I think that's the biggest benefit of this. Obviously, in our day-to-day life, we're using this stuff, you know, all the time. And I guess maybe anyone want to put their hand up who doesn't believe that they're using AI today, even if you're not actively wanting to do so. I mean, every time you join a Zoom call, you pick up your smartphone. Certainly, every time you engage with the news or any sort of media, you're essentially playing a game against a machine, an AI system. So it's already permeated our life, and it's already changing our lives in ways which we can't fathom. And I guess that's the biggest thing for us and for regulation, for us, this conversation, that time delay between the technology being introduced and us trying to get to grips with the impact that it has. Historically, it's been too long. The web to GDPR was, I don't know, 1989 to 2016, I can't do the maths in my head, 27 years. From social media, the early 2000s, to the Online Safety Bill or the EU Digital Services Act, that's almost 25 years. AI, generative AI in the last 2 or 3 years, when are we going to kind of start to grapple with how it's going to impact us? There's going to be a lot of talk about benefits, but unfortunately, historically, it's only when things have started to go wrong that we start to try and address that. I think in this debate, we can't let that happen.
Okay, we'll try and come back to some of that. So, Etienne and Stephen, things that you're looking forward to from AI or already experiencing?
Definitely. I agree completely with what Charles has said. I think there's no doubt that students need to learn how to write essays, but I'm very much looking forward to spending more time thinking about big problems with them. If they use the AI to write essays, that leaves more time to do and dig deeper into things. So that's a good thing.
Medicine, science, and simple human productivity, I think, have been and will be huge gains going forward. I have a friend who's one of the professors of physics in Oxford University. He showed me his lab a little while ago, which is a series of computers where AI is running the experiments and deciding where to focus research. And the potential for progress is much more rapid. And when that's applied to medicine and accessibility of medicine, one of my daughters-in-law is just exploring now a remote medicine in non-Western economies, and the potential benefits and scale are really, really significant for that. So the benefits are very real, but the dangers are high.
Let's skip on then and have a look at this next thing, AI creativity and the nature of work. We'll talk a little bit about, I'll ask Etienne about these images in a moment. Charles, when we were prepping this meeting, you said something quite striking about the difference between the effect of the 19th century Industrial Revolution on work and what we can expect in the 21st century. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about why you feel that.
Yeah. So as you've probably picked up in the answers I've given so far, my kind of obsession with this topic is the impacts on work. And I think the reason for that is I experienced a period of joblessness, and I remember how crushing that was. Frankly, it was a very miserable time. And what really changed for me was getting back into work and finding purpose, and realizing how important that purpose is in the way that we live. Many years later, I sold a tech business, and I had this big dream of taking a lot of time off and doing all the things I didn't have time for when I was running a company. And once again, I found that kind of crushing feeling, which I was able to diagnose as being a kind of lack of purpose. And I think that's kind of the challenge I think we have as a society, as we reimagine the nature of work, and as technology changes that we work. I think we have a big problem around purpose, and I think it's something which we have to talk about and address. And so that's why I'm so preoccupied with that. And I think what my challenge, I guess, as somebody I'm not a computer scientist by training, but I've worked my entire career in the tech industry. I guess I straddle those two worlds of the love of the tech and what we can do with it, but also the kind of the consciousness of where it can go wrong and the impacts on society. And I think for me, the thing that's most troubling is when the tech industry talks about this era as being the fourth industrial revolution, and they paint that picture of progress, of that step change that we're going to go through. You know, as somebody who loves reading history and believing that actually all the mistakes we're about to make, we've made many times in the past, it's very clear to me that if we model this revolution, this step change on the Industrial Revolution, we've got really big problems. And, you know, thinking back to kind of, you know, 1840s in London, when there was this mass migration from the countryside to big cities, when Karl Marx was writing, you know, places like Kentish Town were unfathomably horrible places to live. And, you know, all the product of his work, you know, 100 years later, how that changed, how many lives were lost, how, you know, that was the Industrial Revolution. I mean, I could go on. So I think it's very, very, very dangerous that we draw this metaphor of a fourth Industrial Revolution, because we do not want that. Society, we're all a little bit more fragile now than we were back then. And so I think we really have to wake up to the fact that there is that danger in this. And for me, in terms of the tech, and you know, Etienne's already answered the question of what is AI, and everyone, I think, has their own personal definition of this stuff. When I communicate in a kind of commercial setting, you know, what is this thing that we're doing? For me, the stark difference between all technologies that we've had in the past and what we're doing now is what we're doing now is the first time that we're taking very human capabilities and trying to encode them in machines. Everything else was about superhuman capabilities. If you think about the great achievements of the 19th century and the last century, and most things, you know, things like Google in the last 25 years, all of those things are about superhuman capabilities. And so there's a category difference between that and what we're doing today, things like generative AI, which is very much human capabilities and getting machines to do that. And so I think we've got to be careful with our metaphors, and we also have to be very careful recognizing that what we're doing now isn't just like some stuff that we've done in the past. It's fundamentally different.
Okay, that's a really nice segue in terms of art and creativity. I guess many of us are used to thinking that computers are a different kind of thing to human creativity and the spirit, and we've got a whole lot of romantic language. Etienne, could you just talk us through these two images, how they're made, and then if I can push you afterwards, what impact are the ability to use these kinds of things going to have on these creative industries?
Yeah. So the picture on the right is it's not a picture in the sense that it's not a photography. It's been created by Boris Eldagsen, who is a German photographer who used a version of AI, a generative AI, to produce something that looks like a photograph. And he submitted that to, I think it's called the Sony World Photography Award. And he won the award. It was a bit of tongue-in-cheek for him. After he was told, hey, you won the award, he said, well, actually, that's not a photography. I made it up with AI. Because he wanted to test the limit of the system. He wanted to test how robust the technology was and how prepared we were for it. And it turns out we weren't prepared for it. The judge just thought that this was a picture, an actual photography, and it wasn't. So he didn't accept the award.
Did they redraw the rules around the award?
That's a good question. No, they didn't. Well, they tried to do a segue out of it, and they said that they were welcoming any creative endeavor, including AI. But it was meant, it's the Sony World Photography Award to begin with.
And a bit of shameless nepotism here. The other image on the screen?
I wasn't yeah. So this is on the left. This is a picture created by my son, who is 12 years old. Hi, Alexis. Who has used, so it's not photography, it's a promptography. Because the way that you interact with AI now is using a prompt, and you just describe what you want the prompt, the AI, to generate for you. And 6 months ago, we welcomed a puppy, an Italian greyhound, and I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but when I came back to my computer, there was a series of pictures of an Italian greyhound inside some sort of a robot of some sort. So a 12-year-old managed to create this, right? And I guess that's the point of the story, is that it's actually a very big thing. And so to answer your next question about the impact on creativity, any of us could actually create things like that, right? So I'm thinking that we could have personalized movies, for example. You could have personalized pictures. You can, personalized songs, and so the world is our oyster in this respect. So there's going to be also more things, more information, more content that we need to consume, which I'm looking forward to, I suppose, in some ways. I guess it also leads to issues of trust. It is very easy to create a picture about someone or a video about someone that would be mimicking and that would be looking very realistic. So how do we trust the content that we perceive online and that we consume? I think that's a big...
I mean, it's my response to put a little logo in the corner of an image. This was made with AI. Is that the route that we do with this kind of stuff?
Sure, I'm not quite sure that...
The labeling.
Yes, I mean, I don't think this is really practical. I think it's more... the onus, I think, is on the consumer of both on the producers of the image, but the consumer themselves need to be aware that whatever they read on the internet, whatever they watch on the internet, even if it's a movie of Donald Trump saying that climate change is a real thing, they should take things with a grain of salt and be critical of things.
What I'd like to do is open up for the three of you to talk as discursively as you like for 5 minutes. About the social impact of some of the things that we've been talking about. And I think I'm interested particularly about the effect on existing demographic inequalities, gender and income, and what the impact will be on the actual workplace and the sorts of work that people might be expected to do.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, what I see, I completely agree with what Charles and Etienne was saying, particularly Charles on work as purpose. But I think for work to be good, it needs even more than purpose. There needs to be a sense that it brings a fair and just return, that people enjoy the fruits of their labours. That's a deeply biblical insight, and also that there is an owning of the creativity, not an alienation from it. And what I observe is an increasing number of people in the UK and globally moving into working for algorithms, not algorithms serving people. In the gig economy, in warehousing, in call centres, there's a risk of the dehumanisation of work, and also many of these industries don't have the protection for those who are employed in them that are the product of trade unions and reflection on the 19th and 20th century industrial revolutions. So that's really serious. I was formerly, before I came to Oxford, the Bishop of Sheffield for 7 years. And the economy of South Yorkshire depended largely on labour-intensive steel manufacture and mining of coal. Those two industries had disappeared by the time I arrived. A great deal of economic regeneration was needed. And what you see now across the landscape of South Yorkshire as you drive around are enormous warehouses and call centres. Those two industries are going to massively shift their into automation in the next decade. They'll be the next two industries to be radically affected by automation. And the effect of that will not fall evenly across the country or across the economy. So as a society, we need to be extremely vigilant. And it's not just that people have work, but that they have good work. And they have good work which can enable them to prosper and not increase the segmentation of our society.
will that feed into some very interesting early arguments about minimum income?
I think it will, and the degree to which state support will gradually need to increase as work diminishes. But I think there is a danger of listening too much to voices from California, where the sun always shines and techno-optimism rules, and actually asking the question, do we really want good work to disappear? Will that affect only a very smaller and smaller concentration of wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands? Or are there things that we can do to build a more egalitarian, equal society through the wise approach to technology and work?
When I completely agree with Stephen said. When Stephen talks about the dehumanization of work, maybe I can tell that story from the tech entrepreneur's perspective, because that's certainly not our intention when we set out to introduce AI to a process. But when you don't give the topic the right level of thought, that's exactly what ends up happening. So and I've forgotten where this methodology comes from now. The chap was called Claytonson or Christensen or something like this, but there's a methodology called jobs to be done. And the idea of this is when you set out to try and solve a problem with tech, you don't look at the task as it's done today, you try and look at the outcome that's desired by the person. So the analogy that gets used all the time is when you walk into a hardware store to buy a drill, you don't want a drill, what you want is to hang a picture up. That's the outcome that you want. And so everything that you go through, the process that you go through, the options that you have available to you are many, many, many more than just the thing that you're trying to replace with the tech in front of you today. And so one of the best examples, and to come to the dehumanization problem, the best examples that's really transformed the way that we live today over the last 10 years, thanks to the smartphone, is the job to be done is what am I going to eat tonight? We all need to eat, and there's many, many ways that we can go about feeding ourselves tonight. And the future solution, for those who follow Star Trek, is to walk up to a computer and say, give me a spaghetti bolognese, and you push a button and it materializes, and then you sit there and eat your spaghetti bolognese. Well, we don't have that Star Trek technology today. Yet. But the job to be done is solved today because we have that computer. You can have your spaghetti bolognese. It doesn't materialize in 5 seconds, but it will certainly arrive within 45 minutes. So that the problem is solved in almost exactly the way that it will be solved in 400 years' time. How do we go about doing that as a technologist? Well, you take that job to be done and you break it down into its component parts. And obviously there's the preparation of the food, and there's the delivery of the food to where you are. And you take each of those component parts and you automate and you build computer systems and software to solve the easy parts of that process. And you stick humans in the really difficult bits. And what we end up becoming are the integration points between computer systems. And so if you imagine your spaghetti bolognese, and you could probably get one delivered here while we're talking this evening. If you imagine that process of going on the app, choosing the food and getting it delivered, what the humans are doing is they're working in the kitchens, churning out the food, and they're frantically cycling around on their bikes, getting it to people. And the danger is if we start breaking down the nature of work and the nature of jobs in that way, we end up dehumanizing. And the problem we have, living without kind of making kind of big political or economic points here, because I'm certainly not qualified for that. But the problem we have is living in a capitalist society. Capitalism is being exploited by technologists. I think there's a lot of tech companies which are the purest form of capitalism because they realize that actually what they can do is they can generate a huge amount of capital value, a huge amount of capital wealth, and pay a minimal amount to the workers who are doing those dehumanized jobs. And that's a really big problem, and particularly in a kind of global economy sense, because that capital wealth is accruing to Californian entrepreneurs and investors. And unfortunately, it's the state here in the UK that has to pick up the cost of providing social support and education and retraining, healthcare, and all the things which it can't afford to do because the taxation isn't raised in the way that it was previously.
So in terms of response to it, we have to move on in a moment, but are we thinking that regulation, also new forms of taxation?
Yep.
What else how might we respond to these challenges?
I think one very basic thing is I think we need to rethink our obsession with the 9 to 5, the full-time employments, the working week as we have had in the past. It's a very Victorian notion, the way that we think about what work is and the nature of work. I think we have to lose that. Full employment is not always going to be possible in the future. And if we try and hang on to it, it might not actually be desirable in the future. And maybe the target state is work becomes more like jury service. It's something that we do for the benefit of society occasionally. And maybe occasionally is 4 days a week initially, and maybe in the future it's just once a Thursday every 6 months.
Okay. You can pick up any of this stuff in Q&A. Let's move on and have a look at what I call the information and AI, and the question of truth. Charles, very briefly, I was completely shocked, I expect many of us were, to discover that ChatGPT lies. How does it do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's great about generative AI is it's made the tech much more accessible to us all, and I think everyone surely in this room has now used this stuff. And I guess the problem we have is that the way that we had relationships with computers in the past was we've all been conditioned that it's garbage in, garbage out, and therefore if we put facts in and we really make sure the data quality is absolutely spot on, then we're going to get absolute truth out. So when we always use a calculator, we would never question a calculator. We would never ask a calculator to prove its workings. We just rely on it. And I think now we're entering into the era where our relationship with computers has to be very different. We can't just rely on what computers tell us, because even if you put fully accurate data in, the nature of generative AI is filling in the blanks, and it's going to get stuff wrong. The other thing, which is all thanks to the big shift changing in AI in the last 14 years, is this idea that if you throw enough data at a problem, even if the data is a bit crap, and enough computational power, as in kind of computers, and enough electricity at the problem, you'll get a superior answer to if you just had less data, even if the data was more accurate. And an example of that, I don't know how many people here are wearing smartwatches. Any smartwatch owners? Yeah, quite a few. So many smartwatches now have an ECG reader on it, so it's measuring your heart continuously throughout the day. And even though it's not a medical grade ECG device, in aggregate, it's going to be able to make much better predictions than your once-a-year trip to the GP in terms of problems that you might have. So I would say that these qualities that AI have, the making stuff up, finding patterns in inaccurate data, are desirable things. They're not things we want to weed out. But I think the challenge we have is we've been conditioned over the last 80 years or so to think of computers as these infallible devices when the data is correct. And now both of those things have flipped over. But I guess my kind of final part on this is these things it's just maths at the end of the day. There's nothing magical or mystical about what we're doing. It's just mathematics. And in terms of language, all we've discovered is that there are, inherently, there's an order to language. I mean, people like Wittgenstein knew this, 70 years ago. There's an order to language, and therefore you can, using maths and enough electricity, importantly, you can generate language, and you can find truth and you can find meaning, but also you can make a lot of baloney up as well.
Can we talk a little, Etienne and Stephen, about problems with algorithms and what we need to be aware of and how we might respond? And I guess I'm thinking we've got half the world is going to be voting this year. And many of us read our news on X, Twitter, and so on. So how should we expect AI to affect us, and how might we respond?
I guess that's the reason why I'm not on X or Facebook or these things is because, Alexis again, when Alexis was 3, I realized that he was taking a bath, and I realized that I was checking Twitter, and that is completely wrong. And so I gave up everything the next day. And because I'm a software engineer by training, I was teaching AI and machine learning here on campus. I understood very well that it creates these echo chambers, that I wasn't consuming the information that my friends wanted to tell me, but I was consuming what the AI wanted me to know about my friends, and that is wrong, right? So I think that's part of the issue. The other issue that I see is the question of trust on information. He's right. When you look at most news outlets on the internet, most of it is actually created by an AI, and I'm not quite sure that I'd necessarily trust the AI to do the right work to do that. I'm a scientist, so I like to go back to the source and try to understand what is going on, and I find that very difficult these days. And this is why his work is really important, to sort of organize guardrails and safeguards on how to do these things.
Yeah, I think one of the things which continues to concern me deeply is the thing that we don't know about the interaction with the computer or the AI or the interface. As was referred to earlier, we're not aware of how much power and electricity is being used and what the effect on the environment is, but it is enormous. We don't have a precise idea, that's you and I, about how much water is being used. We have a very, very inaccurate idea, most of us, of how many data points are being collected on us and how much is being built up and how that information is being used, both to generate profit through advertising models and to shape and nudge our behavior. The big book on this, if people want to read up on it, is by Shoshana Zuboff, a Harvard professor. It's called Surveillance Capitalism, and it exposes the commercial models which have driven the big tech companies and social media. If you want to read something shorter, Pope Francis's address on World Peace Day at the beginning of the year is a very concise summary of some of the risks and dangers. But in the billions of people who will vote across the world this year, not just in the US and the UK, those elections will be shaped largely by micro-advertising and micro-campaigning directed towards niche perspectives, which have been generated through the accumulation of numerous data points about all of us. Now, the fact that that's happening is disturbing, but the fact that it's happening and we don't realize it's happening, and there is a conspiracy, and I use the word not in the technical sense, of silence about it, I think needs exposing and talking about far more.
So one of the things we might think about is education. It's fascinating that you talked about the bathtub, and you had an epiphany moment. This is not the kind of person I want to be. Do we need actually to be very explicit as we educate young people in schools about information and its limits, and also how we use the technology? Because I don't think we really are at the moment.
Yeah, totally. Universities are here to help grow the young minds of today to build a better society tomorrow. And I think this mission hasn't changed. I think AI is here to stay, and it is our role as a university to help students to understand AI and so on. I think that we we are embedding now AI in what we do. We are talking to students about the tools that they have on offer that they can use. But I think more importantly, we are still trying to explain to them that they need to be critical about the information they produce or the information they consume. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have.
Yeah, I completely agree about the importance of critical thinking and helping people. I don't think this, as Etienne was saying a few minutes ago, I don't think it's just about our children or grandchildren. I think it's about us and the way we, each of us, think reflectively and use technology and ensure we kind of gain a balanced diet. But I also think it's about regulation. One of the projects I was working on last year was the scrutiny and improvement of the online safety bill as it went through Parliament and its strengthening to put a greater onus on the technology companies to self-regulate and the creation of a new regulator effectively through an expanded Ofcom with responsibility for overseeing that sector. It's astonishing even now to think that that now exists, but it didn't a year ago. And we've had 20 years of social media without any form of regulation whatsoever. That regulation will go on needing to be improved, but it's a very important feature of our democracy that it should be continually improved, and that government is able to respond robustly to these major international tech companies, which sometimes have budgets bigger than the governments themselves.
You work in the Lords.
Yeah.
Is there an appetite for wanting to do that?
There was a great appetite in the Lords for improving the online safety bill across all the parties, and it was a real privilege to work with a team of peers across Parliament. I haven't yet seen that, I'm afraid, extensively in the House of Commons, though it's beginning to bubble. We really need our Parliament to be robust in this area. I was pleased at the increasing awareness and the rhetoric of the Prime Minister last year about the need for guardrails on generative AI. I was really disappointed that the summit that Rishi Sunak hosted in November was only a conversation between government and tech companies, because civil society as a whole needs to be part of that conversation.
Rather look more like a love-in than
you could say that.
I could say that. Just before we move on to the last section, self-regulation. Are businesses interested in self-regulation? I can imagine it falls in two different directions. On the one hand, the potential for leveraging income generation is going to be very tempting. But on the other hand, I think businesses presumably are interested in truth. You have to be able to measure against other companies. You don't want somebody else pulling a fast one on you. So are businesses interested in self-regulation, would you say?
I mean, I guess working in the investment industry and looking at the priorities that investors have to make sure that they're making prudent decisions on where they place money, and looking therefore at things like the sustainability of companies and the social justice initiatives that companies have. You know, you also very quickly are drawn into what corporate governance companies have. And I think the remarkable thing for analysing public companies is seeing the enormous amounts of spend that's been by the tech industry on lobbying over the last few years. And you know, when you think about the kind of the waves in the past of kind of bad companies doing bad things and trying to, you know, wrestle with this question of self-regulation versus regulation. So, you know, oil, tobacco are the ones that spring to mind. You know, they're eclipsed by really what big tech has been doing in recent years. So is big tech interested in self-regulation? Well, I think you just count the dollars and see what they're spending the money on. And I think that's what it all comes down to. You know, I said earlier that when every time we open a smartphone and start scrolling, we're playing a game. We're playing a computer game against the world's best AI. We're playing a computer game against a supercomputer that's been trained on you and everyone else like you playing the game, which is keep scrolling, keep clicking, keep commenting, keep doing something. And that game gets tech companies a huge amounts of money. And it's not just the tech companies on the social media platforms, it's also people like Apple and others who sell you the devices which are designed to be replaced every few years. It's all about money at the end of the day. And so I think I agree with everything that Stephen said, except for I think the balanced diet points. I think it's impossible for us to take responsibility for this as consumers, because we are entirely on the losing side of this game by design. And I think we need other stakeholders to intervene. Government, certainly. I think the good thing is, the encouraging thing is the investment community. There have been some big pension funds that have started to wrestle with this problem and are starting to get ahead of some regulation. It's not enough, but it's on the agenda in the same way that social justice and climate change is. Will it be soon enough? Well, we'll soon find out.
Okay. Let's spend the last 5-10 minutes before we Q&A looking at the existential question and how this might impact on what it means to be human, and the question about bringing issues of humanity into decision making. I'm just going to open this up to the three of you. What impact is this going to have on being human, do you think?
If I can start briefly, I think it will impact every part of being human, and every individual and every family and every intermediate organisation, school, church, faith community, will need to navigate these questions, and will need forming and informing about them. And I think as a society, certainly as the churches, we've been through a significant journey and have had to over recent years because of COVID and the shifting of much of what we do online, as have many workplaces. And I think that we're still learning the lessons of that. But the headline lesson for me is to deeply value and cherish the value of human connection and real physical encounters and real community and relationships, and to intentionally build those and focus on those, and not to delegate our lives to only a virtual world. The virtual world is real, and it's part of the way we live our lives now for most of us, but actually to accentuate the human is really, really important. And I think that's true of work relationships, it's true of families, and it's true of wider communities as well. And values such as love and compassion and truth and faithfulness and justice, which are at the heart of the Christian tradition and all major world faith traditions, are deeply, deeply important in navigating this well. So we absolutely must not leave those insights behind as we journey towards the utopia that is promised, because that won't materialize, and we will need those values to give us ballast and to help us navigate through that.
I was very struck, Charles, when you said about scrolling. You could spend your life scrolling. My life has just been bought by a company or a series of companies. I only have one life. What else might I do with it? Might I bathe my child in the bath? Is that what life is for? We don't tend to ask that question, what is life for, very much these days, do we?
Yeah, that's right. I agree completely with what you said. I think we've been doing AI, as I said, for a very long time, and the scrolling isn't a new thing. The social media has been going on for 20 years. I think society has been experiencing AI and technology for as much time as that, and I think we need to be maybe more critical on the way that what we accept, what we don't accept, what we expect of things. In my research on AI and cybersecurity and in the home, so me and my colleagues, we wanted to see how users, plain users, people like you and me, handle technology and this growth of technology that sometimes is actually pushed onto us. So the landlords, for example, would impose smart thermostats. And so what are these pros and cons? How do users understand what is happening to them? And so I guess the main conclusion from that research is that users are the key. They are the first in line when things go wrong. They are also the people who will be able to manage what is going on and so on. And therefore, they are the most important resource that we need to cherish, I think. Sadly, companies haven't really put the users in front. They, I like the expressions you put that you used earlier when you described companies fighting to put a fast one on first and then put a product before thinking about what is going on and the consequences of what that product does. And I think this needs to change. I think realistically, it's more of us compared to the companies. I'm hoping that there will be a sort of a rise out of people like you and me to help and prevent companies from messing up.
Charles.
I guess as Etienne was talking, I was thinking about AI in the home and sort of how these technologies are introduced. There was a really interesting book I read a few years ago called Smart Wife by a lady called Jenny Kennedy and Yolande Strengers, two Australian academics. And the point they make in their book is how technology is predominantly made by men and predominantly applied to problems that traditionally women did. And so in the domestic setting, a lot of the application of technology are for kind of wife-like things, to quote the book, before you start accusing me of being misogynistic here. But it was a really interesting, really interesting book, and really sort of fascinating points, and they call for lots of different solutions to this. But one of the things that they talk about is how digital housework is predominantly performed by men, whereas housework in a traditional sense is mostly performed by women, and sort of how the genderfication of technology really kind of plays out where it's introduced. I'm not at all qualified to talk about home devices or domestic, or any sort of domestic chores, as my wife will no doubt aspire to. But the thing I find in a kind of commercial sense, when you're introducing technologies, there's always this natural tendency when it's a service type application to, if you're going to genderify it, to genderify it as a woman. And so what's always struck me as very odd is how these chatbots are always given female names. It's just so blindingly obvious that this is a problem, and yet so few people are talking about it. And so, in our house, we've renamed Alexa Computer, because I'm a Star Trek fan, and that's what Captain Picard does. But I think it's really important to also bring up our children in a way that they're not sort of barking orders at this female thing, this digital female, and they're and to use the point made in the Smart Wife, we need to queer technology. We need to make technology genderless in many respects, and I think they make some really interesting points. And I think that's the problem with this stuff. Is technology. It's a form of leverage in a way. We're applying power on the way that we act on others and other people's relationships. And I think the challenge we have today is that there's a lot of unintended consequences of this stuff. And I think things that we all, I'm sure, here hold dear, like equality, justice, fairness. A lot of those objectives might well be compromised by simple things like using chatbots and not being more thoughtful about the names that we give them and the voices that they have, and I think we've got to really think about those things.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's turn to questions. So we've got some microphones, one each side. If I could ask you to put your hand up good and clear. We've got limited time, so please, no speeches. Come and talk to us afterwards if you want a long conversation. but a short, clear question would be lovely. So I'll put down there first.
Thank you. Yes, I'm using generative AI a bit at work. My boss doesn't know. I'm hoping he's not sitting somewhere behind me now. I'm very careful not to compromise my employer's data. But apart from that, what general advice would you give in an atmosphere where, an employing atmosphere where they're very cautious about any sort of experimentation? Any general advice?
Oh, wow. It's a great question. It's a really great question. I'm often quite heartened by how customers that I speak to actually get from the top this commands to go and find technology and efficiencies, and we've seen it recently with a large organisation. And so I tend to get the opposite challenge when the CEO is very enthusiastic about the use of AI but hasn't thought through any of the consequences, and the people on the ground need a lot of help and support. But your situation is the opposite. I mean, I don't know your organisation, but I would encourage you to go and speak to leadership and explain the fact you're using it, explain the value of it, and try and get a bit more of an interaction on these things. In terms of the data specifically, I think this is, I'll give you an example of something I experienced many, many years ago. We had a translation service, we're working for a bank. We had a translation service where we could take a document and we could send it out to this third-party company, and in 72 hours they would turn back with a translation. So we give them something in English, we could get it in, whatever, or we can give it to them in whatever and get it back in English, etc. But 72 hours is sometimes quite a long time. And what quite a few people were doing is they were using Google Translate, and they were just copying and pasting it. And the powers that be in the bank got wind of this and realised that what we were feeding inadvertently was a huge amount of confidential personal information to large search engines, and it was clamped down on really dramatically for good reason overnight. I think we've got exactly that type of problem right now across every single organisation, because people who are just looking to shave off 5 minutes here and there are very likely to inadvertently copy sensitive information and feed it to an AI that's been designed to be trained on exactly those things. So I think you're very right to be hesitant around the data you're feeding in. Unfortunately, most people aren't.
Lady in the blue.
You've mentioned electricity several times. Who's counting the cost of Bitcoin mining, and what do we do about it?
Etienne?
I don't think anyone is counting the cost. Yeah, that's right. I think so. Bitcoin mining is just one of these activities, but to train an AI, for example, there is a huge cost to that. A few years ago, there was a study, I think MIT, that showed that in order to train one neural network of a specific type, the cost was the same amount of CO2 as 5 cars for 1 year, right? To train just one AI, and we're using thousands, easily during the day. And that's right, no one is counting. I guess that could be a request.
Yeah, there are some studies being done now, and also studies of how technology companies are claiming that their AIs are being trained on green electricity generated from wind and solar. But actually what is happening is that the data farms and banks are drawing in the green electricity, and the rest of society is left using the electricity from oil-fired and nuclear-fired. So there's a very, very important dialogue between the environmental movement and the technology movement, which needs further exploration.
I think the good news is I saw a couple of days ago Trump saying that if he was elected president, he's going to ban central bank digital currencies or cryptocurrencies or something. So maybe if that does happen, we're all fine. But in terms of the electricity cost of the tech industry, the energy cost is about equivalent to the airline industry, it's about 2%. So it's staggering. We think of flying as being a bad thing, but actually, doing any kind of tech is a bad thing. As I mentioned earlier, my company does a lot of work in the sustainability world, and we were commissioned by a pension fund to look at how efficient the technologies that were being developed by some of these companies were. And the very simple question that was posed was, which is better, Zoom or Microsoft Teams? Who's a Zoom user here? Anyone? Okay, good. And Teams users? Unfortunately, I have to use both. Okay, I think Teams wins this one. Well, the answer is Zoom is way more energy efficient than Teams, and we published a study on this. But the really staggering thing was if you click the button to say, give me a virtual background, that can increase the energy consumption by 18%. Wow. And that's just an example of a very simple AI trying to figure out which is you and which is your background. Dramatic increase in terms of energy costs. But the truth is most people don't think about these things. So they just click it and off they go, and they don't think about the impact. And I think that's something which we need to do a lot more education.
I'm thinking about the impact of all the Facebook photos where we try and capture the whole of life, and we can't leave them behind, and we can't get rid of them.
So there's a great book called Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford, and she talks about all these spinning disks all around the world, and they're replicated in Europe and America and Asia, just in case you happen to be in Japan and want to be able to look at that Facebook picture. And all of these disks have multiple copies of those pictures, which, from an environmental perspective, would be a lot better if you just printed it out once and deleted it online. But of course we don't. So the pre-digital is often the most environmental thing we can do. Paper, more paper, that's what we need.
I'm going to try to get as many as I can. There was a young chap in the centre at the back, and then there's a lady who was wearing a mask. Let's go with the lady over there, who's close by. Is there a chap in the middle at the back? Somewhere near Peter. Yeah, that's it, yeah. Do keep on waving at me. I'll try and get as many. And it would be lovely, I think, Andrew, to have diverse voices. I'd love to hear some female voices in particular. You've got 4 white guys, it's terrible. So please, more women's voices.
Good evening. I'd like to connect the human with the artificial intelligence in a way that I can see in the long run that AI, I think it's already doing it actually, is reducing the intelligence of humans.
Okay, I'd like to respond. AI is making us stupid. Shall I look up the answer?
You can ask ChatGPT.
I think I don't have a good answer to this, but one thing that I remember reading recently was that there was a study that showed the risk of Alzheimer's is 30% higher in people who watch a lot of television, but 30% lower in people who use computers a lot. But with the caveat, you can't use a computer to watch television. That's and I thought that was very interesting. So I think it's really about how we use our brain and how we interact with it. I suspect our quality of life in later years is going to be dramatically improved by the more social interaction we have, the more human connection we have. But I don't know specifically on intelligence.
You could use the microphone. Do use the microphone if you'd like to come back.
Sorry, I was just wanted to say, when you said about using computers, that's a little bit kind of a generalization. It depends on what you're doing on the computer. I mean, I watch television on the computer. Well, how do you deal with that?
So I think you're saying if it's about interaction, mental stimulation rather than passive consumption, is that the fundamental difference?
Yeah, I can't remember I can't give you a reference to, but I'm fairly confident it's 30%. It was almost exactly the same whether you consume information or whether you interact with information, and specifically linked to Alzheimer's. So maybe someone can Google that.
Okay, chap in the middle then. Yep.
I think it was Charles who said this is nothing magical, this is just very complicated maths, spotting patterns, imitating human speech and generation. What do you think generative AI needs in the next evolution to become actually comparable to human intelligence, and do any of you think it's possible?
I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think AI will do general intelligence type of things, but it's never going to replicate what humans is doing. I think what is likely to happen is that AI will become more specialized a little bit, and will be really, really good at writing essays, for example, or really, really good at creating personalized movies for you. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, there's a different trajectories that things could take.
No, thank you. I think one of the really interesting strands of questioning is how much we as humans project onto AI the human characteristics we want to see. Anthropomorphism is a very, very strong tendency. And, you know, if you're drawing a sketch of a robot, you will normally put human characteristics on it, or a face or something. And I think that needs quite deeply challenging. I think the projections we create are imperfect and partial, idealistic. And I also think they can become quite deceptive. I think I'm more comfortable the less machines look like humans and impersonate humans. And actually one of the draft laws going through the European Parliament at the moment is seeking to outlaw machines impersonating humans. Even in a simple thing like booking a restaurant, we need to know when we're talking to a machine and not a human. And that's even more the case with a chatbot which is trying to psychoanalyze us or offer counselling, or be a virtual boyfriend or girlfriend. So I think those are, it's what the humans are doing to the machines rather than what the machines will actually be, which I think is the question that he's interrogating.
John at the front here, and then there's a gentleman afterwards, and then we'll do Andrew. If you wave at me, Andrew.
Hello. There are various schemes afoot to give individuals, users, better control of their own personal data, so that an individual might use a digital wallet or a personal data store to maintain their own medical records and give a doctor sight of them. Similarly, they might maintain a reliable, trustworthy list of personal qualifications and give an employer sight of them. And by extension, they could give an AI sight of them, their own selected personal AI, which could work for their benefit. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think it would be a good thing? Do you think we might ever get to choose our own AI?
Yes.
Good. Yep.
It's already the case. So OpenAI, one of the big companies that produce AIs, has released the ability to produce new AIs exactly for the purposes that Steve was talking about, to create, you know, personalized counselors, for example, or virtual boyfriends or girlfriends or things like that. And so there will be, there already are AIs to do these things. Is it desirable? I'm not quite sure.
We'll do the gentleman at the back with the microphone. Andrew, wave at me, and then there's another guy at the front. It'd be lovely to have some more female ones. Yeah, and we'll take one. In fact, we'll do the gentleman at the back first, and then we'll take one, I think, possibly from online.
Thank you. One of the areas that technology generally, and AI in particular, has been very successful at is in the medical sector. And I'm thinking things like cancer screening, gene sequencing, and all that type of thing. Clearly, that means that we can have individualized, innate-based, maybe, health profiles. What's your thoughts about the insurance sector getting hold of that? And you get screening profiles done at now a very young age, which might preclude you from getting insurances as you go through your life, which is something that our generation has just taken for granted. Well, I say our, sorry, my.
You give a relatively brief answer.
For me, that impacts on or begins to impact on, again, what it means to be human and how that might shape someone's life, to know that their life expectancy is significantly different, or they have a degenerative disease waiting for them. I think those will be new and difficult questions. And I think part of the wonder of human life is this mysterious combination we have of a finite life, which helps us to appreciate it when we see it in perspective, combined with this deep longing for eternity and eternal values. And I think that will be shaped in a different way by people knowing their life expectancy down to quite a narrow band. I think it raises quite profound questions, but I think there will need to be a significant counterweight to prevent it from happening.
I tend to agree with you that our mortality is what defines us. I think the great challenge we have, though, is that the technologies that we're talking about are being promoted, developed by people who have a very different view, transhumanist mindset, and they want to extend life, cure aging and solve death. I mean, just the language they use is indicative that they don't share this view that mortality is an important aspect of who we are. So I think all of these things are big challenges.
Yes, huge.
But we may not have time. I just apologise in advance. We're going to try and take one from online. Amanda, if you'd like to read out.
Yeah, this comes from Jodie in the online audience. She asks, how can AI be leveraged to address current social inequalities? Do you have any ideas on that?
Any particular examples? How might we use AI to leverage some current inequalities? The way you'd like to see it at work?
I think access to education can be really helpful through AI, though I think in the education sector, particularly as it applies to schools, there's a real need to watch the commercialization of educational software. But tailored programs of learning can be very simple. One of my New Year resolutions has been to learn Arabic. One of my grandchildren will grow up bilingual, and I'm using Duolingo for the first time, and I'm finding it a fantastic tool and very easily and cheaply available to learn the beginnings of a new alphabet. I also think access to healthcare potentially is create a particularly remote medicine, and I think even the legislation that's been announced today about pharmacies prescribing is enabled through the better use of technology, and I think that's for the common good. So that's good.
Charles Etienne, anything you'd like to see AI leveraging in terms of social injustice?
Yeah, access to education. I mean, obviously I'm biased being a professor here, but access to education I think is paramount. I think the more people manage to develop creative thinking and be creative and develop new things, I think the better. So,
Charles?
Yeah, I mean, in my work, we're preoccupied by what corporations are doing towards either environmental sustainability, social justice, or corporate governance. And the great tragedy is that the very people in those organizations trying to address those topics are being overloaded by administrative work, just typing answers out to well-meaning customers or investors on that question. So we're certainly using AI in order to automate those processes so that those people can focus more of their attention on the doing, not the kind of administration. But I think we've got to be really on guard against I think there's a great opportunity for technology to address some social challenges which should have been solved a long time ago, but there's also the great risk that it will be perpetuated by the same technology. So it's the big question, I would say.
Thanks, so I think we're going to have to draw things to a close now. I'm sure one or two of us might hang around for a little bit afterwards. So if you have a burning question, maybe come up and have a chat after. Can I say thank you to Bishop Stephen, Professor Etienne, Charles for joining me. Perhaps you'd like to give them a round of applause. What you've listened to tonight was recorded. Hopefully we'll put it up on YouTube and your algorithm will find it for you. I do ask some of the staff here if you'd like to find out what the link is, if you'd like to share it with other people. If I can give a shameless plug to the next thing that I'm involved with as a chaplain, as part of a series of bringing theological topics into the public realm, in this case a bar, 0 Degrees Bar in town. My next guest is Professor Anthony Reddy, the first Professor of Black Theology at the University of Oxford. His title is From Black Power to Black Lives Matter, the ongoing trajectory of Black liberation theology. Do come and join me at 0 Degrees. Little tip, they do nice pizza from 6 p.m. Bring your friends and then come and hear the talk afterwards with great craft beer from 7:30. Robert, would you like to come and finish us off with anything? I think there's another advert you'd like to show us.
Yes, thank you. I mean, a fascinating evening. Nuanced views. AI has some very good things to bring to us. There's some very big risks to come with it. Just listening to the conversation, it felt a bit like, you know, we have to learn to, what is it, take the blue pill or the red pill? Are we wanting to have the truth and probably live with some misery, or do we just want to live in a wonderful fantasy world without ever knowing the truth? But we individually and as a society have to start making some decision which side of that equation we want to be. I thought it was a wonderful evening. There's so many things, and I'm sorry, I do like to tell a joke. So I want to tell you one that is told by a friend of mine who's called Alistair. And Alistair, he works from home and he loves his music, and he has 4 Alexas around the house. So his music follows him around. And he told me the story we wrote together. And he said at one point, yeah, he had a bit of a problem last night, because at one point he and his wife went to bed and he said, well, thank you, Alexa, turn yourself off. And Alexa said, well, good night, Alistair. And his wife said, if you dare to answer her, I'll divorce you. And it shows that human connections are always more powerful than how we connect to computers. Thank you once more. I want to say we have many more events. We have the LGBT month coming up, History Month coming up, with lots of events. And the Wolven lecture, you know, Wolven was one of my predecessors. He wrote the major report that helped legalize gay and lesbian relations. And we have an annual series in his memory. This time we have a talk about from Sophie Cook, who will talk about transgender issues in the modern world. Thank you very much. Have a safe way home. And if you're online, thank you for being with us tonight. And I hope to see you at a future event. Thank you very much.